They thought they could laugh it off. They thought he was just another black officer in a room full of people who believed their power and privilege gave them the right to mock him. The tension in the captain's office was thick enough to cut with a knife. The sound of laughter echoed through the room, a mix of smug chuckles and condescending remarks, all aimed at Marcus Carter, the black officer standing silently in the corner. The officers gathered around the captain's desk didn't seem to care about the injustice they were perpetuating. They didn't see Marcus for what he was, a man with integrity, a man with potential, a man who had worked just as hard, if not harder, than any of them to earn his place. To them, he was just another officer, another man of color, unworthy of respect. Who let this guy in here? One of them sneered. Probably here to clean up the place. Another officer snickered. Doesn't belong here. Too bad, huh? Marcus remained still, his eyes unwavering, his posture calm. He had dealt with this kind of treatment before. He knew how to keep his composure when the world tried to drag him down. But deep down, the weight of the insults stung. He had worked so hard to get here, and yet, here they were, mocking him like he was nothing. He refused to let their words shake him. They could laugh all they wanted. He had a purpose. He had a plan. What they didn't know was that Marcus Carter was not just another officer. He wasn't some rookie who could be discarded and belittled without consequences. He wasn't someone they could trample on just because they thought he was beneath them. The officers continued to make jokes at his expense, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The door to the captain's office swung open, and Captain James Reynolds stepped in. He was a tall, imposing man, well respected in the department. He had seen it all, the corruption, the manipulation, the disregard for justice. But he hadn't seen Marcus Carter for who he truly was, not yet. As Captain Reynolds made his way to the front of the room, the laughter died down. The officers fell silent, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The captain's expression was unreadable. He walked to his desk, set down his briefcase, and then turned to face the room full of officers. "I trust you all are behaving yourself in here," he asked, his voice steady. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as the officers avoided eye contact, sensing the change in the air. Marcus stood at attention, his face calm, but his mind racing. This was the moment when everything changed. The captain's eyes briefly scanned the room before settling on Marcus. "Officer Carter," he said, his tone changing. "I have a job for you. You've earned it." The officers around the room shifted in their seats. The chuckles and whispers from moments ago had vanished. Now, all eyes were on Marcus. He had just been handed the most important responsibility of his career, the command of a special unit tasked with cleaning up the very corruption they had been laughing about moments before. The room was stunned into silence. For a moment, no one knew what to say. The laughter that had filled the space just moments ago seemed like a distant memory. It was replaced by something heavier, the weight of realization. Marcus had proven them wrong. He wasn't the punchline of their joke. He was the one in control now. And as the captain handed him the reins, the officers who had once mocked him now found themselves under his authority. Marcus Carter had just stepped into his power. The officers were stunned into silence as Captain Reynolds' words hung in the air. Marcus Carter stood in front of them, his face calm, his posture unwavering. The moment felt surreal. Just minutes ago, they had been mocking him, belittling him, treating him as if he were nothing more than an obstacle to their day. Now, he was their superior. The very same man they had laughed at was now in charge. The captain's command was clear, and there was no mistaking it. Marcus had just been given a position of power that none of the officers in the room could deny. "This unit needs someone with integrity," Captain Reynolds continued, his voice steady, filled with authority. "Someone who knows how to stand firm in the face of adversity. I trust you, Officer Carter. It's time to show them what true leadership looks like." The words hit Marcus like a wave, but he held his ground, knowing this moment was more than just about him. This was about proving something bigger. He had to lead, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, ridiculed, or overlooked because of the color of their skin. As the captain left the room, Marcus turned toward the officers who had once mocked him. Their faces were pale, their eyes a mix of disbelief and something else, fear. They knew that the tide had turned. Marcus was no longer the object of their jokes. He was the man who held their careers in his hands. "You all have your assignments," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I'll be overseeing everything from here on out. Any questions? The room was still. No one moved. No one spoke. Marcus walked to the front, taking a seat at the captain's desk, the weight of the position settling over him. But it wasn't just the job that weighed on him. It was the responsibility. He had to fix a broken system. He had to show that leadership wasn't about making people feel small. It was about lifting them up. It was about making sure the right thing was always done, no matter the cost. He opened the drawer of the desk, pulling out the files he had been working on for weeks. Corruption. Misconduct. There was so much work to be done, but he was ready. He had been ready for this moment his entire life. The officers in the room were starting to whisper among themselves, but Marcus didn't care. The whispers no longer had power over him. It was his turn now. He looked at the officers one last time, meeting each of their eyes. If you're here to do what's right, we'll get along just fine. If not, I'll be watching. And believe me, I won't turn a blind eye. Marcus leaned back in the chair, his fingers tapping the desk as he began to strategize. This was only the beginning. The work ahead would be difficult, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down. He had a duty, not just to himself, but to everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and justice. As the officers filed out of the room, one by one, Marcus stood, his expression calm but resolute. He had just taken the first step in changing the system from the inside. It was no longer about power or pride. It was about something deeper. It was about doing what was right. And that was something the old guard would have to learn the hard way. Marcus sat at the desk, the weight of his new position settling in with every passing minute. He glanced at the files spread out in front of him, each one representing a piece of the system he now had to fix. His eyes moved from one document to another, each case more disturbing than the last. He wasn't just dealing with simple misconduct. He was facing a network of corruption that ran deep within the department. It was overwhelming, but Marcus had always believed in doing the right thing, no matter how difficult it seemed. The office was quiet, the faint hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the room. The officers he had once worked alongside had all gone back to their desks, but they weren't the same anymore. They didn't look at him the same way. The mocking, the jokes, it was all gone. Now, they were uncertain, unsure of how to approach the man they had once ridiculed. Marcus felt their eyes on him, but he kept his focus. He had a job to do. He had made a promise to himself and to everyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed because of who they were. He wouldn't let them down. A knock on the door broke his concentration. "Come in," Marcus said, his voice steady. The door opened, and a young officer stepped inside. It was Officer Sarah Thompson, someone Marcus had known for years, but someone who had always kept her distance from him. She was one of the officers who had been part of the group that mocked him, but now, she stood before him, her posture straight, her expression serious. "Sir, I just wanted to check in," she said, her voice hesitant. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about respect. And it seemed like, for the first time, Sarah was trying to find a way to bridge the gap that had once separated them. "You wanted to check in," Marcus repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I know I wasn't always the easiest to work with, but I've been thinking a lot about what happened earlier. I just want to say, I'm sorry for everything." Marcus could hear the sincerity in her voice. He had never expected an apology, especially not from someone who had been part of the group that had laughed at him. But here she was, standing in front of him, offering a genuine apology. "I appreciate that, Officer Thompson," Marcus said, his voice calm. "But you don't have to apologize. We're all here to do the right thing. And if you're ready to do that, then that's all that matters." Sarah nodded, her shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. She seemed to understand now. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was choosing to be part of something bigger. "Thank you, sir," Sarah said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I'll do my best." As she left the office, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment, not from the apology, but from the realization that he was already making a difference. It wasn't about having power or control. It was about changing the culture from within. He had started with one small step, a simple act of standing his ground. Now, that was starting to ripple outward. The room felt a little quieter, but the change was tangible. Marcus knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be those who resisted, those who clung to old habits and old ways of thinking. But he was ready for it. He had already proven to them that he wasn't just some figurehead. He wasn't just a man who had been given a title. He was the one who would change the system, piece by piece. He was the one who would ensure that no one would be overlooked again. And with that thought, Marcus got back to work. There was still so much to be done. Marcus sat back in his chair, the weight of the responsibility settling in deeper than before. The room was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that held potential, the kind of quiet that was pregnant with possibility. Outside, the sounds of the city hummed, indifferent to the changes happening within the walls of this office. But inside, Marcus knew that something was shifting, something important. He had already taken the first steps to challenge the system, but the real work was just beginning. He had a list of names, a stack of files, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. But what mattered most now was making sure his decisions reflected the values he had always held: fairness, justice, and equality. He turned his attention back to the files on his desk, scanning them with a new sense of determination. The corruption ran deep in the department, but Marcus knew it wasn't something that would be solved overnight. It would take time, effort, and most of all, patience. He knew this was more than just about exposing the wrongdoers. It was about building trust, not just with the community, but with the officers who had once mocked him. As he sifted through the files, the door creaked open, and another officer stepped inside. It was Lieutenant Carla Hayes, a seasoned officer who had always been a reliable presence in the department. But even Carla wasn't immune to the toxic environment that had poisoned the department for so long. She had always been quiet about her opinions, but Marcus could tell she was conflicted. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Carla asked, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of curiosity. Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze. He had always respected Carla, but there was something different now, something that made the conversation feel heavier than it had before. "Yes, Lieutenant," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I need your help with something. We need to rebuild trust, and that starts with us. We need to make sure that the people we serve know we're committed to doing things the right way." Carla nodded, but Marcus could see the hesitation in her eyes. "I know it's not going to be easy," he continued. "There are people in this department who are going to resist. But we can't back down. We can't let the culture of corruption continue." For a long moment, Carla didn't say anything. She just stood there, processing what Marcus had said. Finally, she spoke. "You're right. I've seen enough of it, too. But it's not just the officers who are the problem. It's the entire system. We need to change how things are done, from the top down." Marcus felt a surge of relief. It wasn't just him anymore. Carla was on board. She understood what needed to be done. "Exactly," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "And we're going to start with the way we handle investigations. No more cover-ups. No more looking the other way. It's time for accountability." Carla's eyes softened, and for the first time since entering the office, Marcus saw a hint of hope in her expression. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice resolute. "We can do this, together." As Carla left the room, Marcus leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment to breathe. It was going to be a long road, but for the first time, he felt like they might actually be able to make a difference. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no turning back now. He knew there would be more difficult conversations, more resistance, and more challenges ahead. But with people like Carla by his side, he was ready to face them all. The department would change, and so would the city. It was only a matter of time. Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. It was a beautiful view, but the beauty of the city didn't hide the problems within it. The weight of his new responsibilities was heavier than he had expected, but it was a weight he had willingly chosen to carry. Every day, every decision mattered now more than ever. He knew that changing the culture of the department wouldn't be easy. Some people had already begun to push back, whispering about how things had changed and how Marcus wasn't the same man they had mocked just weeks ago. He could feel the tension in the air, but he wasn't about to let it deter him. The room was still, silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," Marcus called without turning around. The door creaked open, and Lieutenant Carla Hayes entered, her expression as determined as ever. "I've been thinking about our next steps," she said, her voice steady. "We need to address the root of the problem, Marcus. It's not just about exposing corruption. It's about creating a new environment where this behavior isn't tolerated anymore. We need to bring in new training, new policies, and we need to start from the ground up. Marcus turned around to face her, nodding in agreement. You're right, he said. We can't just keep reacting to the problems. We need to be proactive. We need to teach the next generation of officers what it means to serve with integrity. Carla smiled slightly. It won't be easy. We'll face resistance. But we've got to keep pushing forward. Marcus stood up and walked over to the desk, his fingers lightly grazing the papers scattered across it. I know, and I'm ready for it. But we need to make sure that everyone understands that this isn't just about policy changes. It's about changing the mindset of everyone in this department. We need to hold each other accountable. Carla crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing slightly. How do we do that? How do we ensure that the changes stick? Marcus took a deep breath, thinking for a moment. It starts with trust. We've got to rebuild the trust, not just with the community, but within the department itself. We need transparency, and we need to lead by example. Carla nodded. And you're ready to take that on? I've been ready for a long time, Marcus said, his voice firm. But this is bigger than me. This is about changing a system that's been broken for far too long. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Finally, Carla spoke. Then let's do it. Let's make this happen. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had given in days. I'm with you, Carla. We're in this together. As Carla left the office, Marcus turned back to the window, his thoughts now focused. There was so much work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, he felt confident that change was possible. They were on the right path, and no matter the obstacles ahead, he wouldn't stop fighting for what was right. The sun had set, but Marcus knew that the dawn of a new day for the department was just beginning. The weeks passed, and Marcus could feel the shift in the department. The first training session had been a challenge, but it had also been an eye-opening experience for everyone involved. It wasn't just about going over policies and procedures. It was about creating a dialogue, breaking down the walls that had been built over the years. For the first time, the officers were being forced to confront their biases, their actions, and the culture that had allowed injustice to thrive within their ranks. Marcus had expected resistance, but what surprised him was how many of the officers, even those who had once mocked him, began to change. They didn't change overnight, but the seeds were planted, and Marcus was determined to nurture them. The department had been like a machine, operating on autopilot for far too long. Now, it was up to Marcus and the team he was building to guide it in the right direction. But it wasn't just about changing policies or implementing new systems. It was about rebuilding trust, and that meant holding everyone accountable, starting with the leadership. One morning, Marcus found himself in the captain's office again. This time, it wasn't a surprise meeting, but it was still just as significant. Captain Reynolds sat at his desk, looking over a report. As Marcus entered, the captain glanced up and motioned for him to sit. "How's it going, Marcus?" the captain asked, his tone more genuine than it had been in the past. "It's going," Marcus replied, settling into the chair across from the captain. "We're making progress, but it's slow. There's a lot of work to be done." Captain Reynolds nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I know. I've been seeing the changes, and I've been hearing the feedback. You're doing something different, Marcus. I'll admit, I didn't expect it." Marcus couldn't help but smile. Change is never easy, but it's necessary. We're creating a department that stands for something more than just law enforcement. It's about accountability, integrity, and earning the trust of the people we serve. The captain leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk. "I've been thinking about that, and I think it's time we show the rest of the department that we're committed to these changes. I want you to lead a new initiative, something that will set the standard for everyone else." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" The captain pushed a folder across the desk. "I want you to take charge of an outreach program, something that bridges the gap between the police department and the community. You've been talking about rebuilding trust, right? This is your chance to do it, in a real, tangible way." Marcus opened the folder, scanning through the proposal. It was ambitious, but it felt right. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to put his ideas into action and prove that things could be different. "I'll take it," Marcus said, his voice firm. "This is exactly what we need." Captain Reynolds nodded. "I know you will, and I'm right behind you on this." As Marcus left the office, a sense of excitement filled him. This was the next step. He wasn't just changing the department from the inside. He was going to show the world that law enforcement could be a force for good, that it could be a pillar of the community, not something to fear. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, Marcus felt like they were heading in the right direction. The work was far from over, but today, for the first time, it felt like real change was within reach. The day of the community outreach program arrived, and Marcus stood at the front of the room, looking out at the sea of faces before him. This was the moment that would define everything they had been working toward. The officers gathered in the room were there to listen, to learn, and most importantly, to engage with the community they served. Marcus knew that this would not be easy. The tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. It was the skepticism that many of the officers still carried. They weren't used to this type of engagement. For years, the relationship between the police and the community had been strained, and breaking down those walls would take more than just a few meetings. It would take time, effort, and most of all, trust. As Marcus stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. He could feel the eyes of the officers and community members on him, waiting for him to speak. But before he said anything, he took a deep breath, knowing this was his chance to set the tone for what was to come. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady and strong. "I want to thank you all for being here today. This isn't just another meeting. This is the beginning of something new. It's the beginning of rebuilding trust between the police and the community. For too long, we've been divided. For too long, we've been standing on opposite sides, not listening to each other. But that ends today." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was still, but there was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, something could change. I know there are some of you here who don't believe that things can be different. I know there are officers who still don't trust the people we serve. And I know there are community members who don't trust us. But I'm here to tell you that change is possible. We can make it happen. But we can't do it alone. We need to work together. We need to listen to each other. We need to build a foundation of trust, and that starts right here, right now. Marcus looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the officers and community members. He could see the skepticism in some of their faces, but he also saw something else: hope. For the first time, they were willing to listen. And that was the first step. The meeting went on for hours, with conversations happening between officers and community leaders, discussing everything from improving communication to addressing issues of racial profiling and police brutality. Marcus facilitated the discussions, but he made sure that everyone's voice was heard. The officers were uncomfortable at first, unsure of how to engage, but as the day wore on, they began to open up. The community members were patient, sharing their concerns and offering suggestions for how the police could improve. By the end of the day, Marcus could see the shift. It wasn't huge, but it was real. The officers were no longer just going through the motions. They were actively participating in the conversation. They were listening, and more importantly, they were understanding. When the meeting finally wrapped up, Marcus stood at the front, feeling a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like they were heading in the right direction. As the room emptied out, Carla approached him, a smile on her face. "That went better than I thought it would," she said. "You've got them listening, Marcus." Marcus smiled, but his mind was already on the next step. "We've got a long way to go," he said. "But we've made the first move. And that's something." The following weeks were filled with progress, but also with setbacks. Marcus knew that changing the culture of the department wouldn't be a quick or easy process. Every day, there were challenges that tested his resolve. Some officers embraced the changes, eager to be part of a new, more inclusive future. Others were still resistant, clinging to old ways and refusing to let go of the biases that had been ingrained in them for years. But Marcus wasn't discouraged. He had made a commitment, not just to the department, but to the community, and he was determined to see it through. One afternoon, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing reports, when Carla knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" she asked. Marcus nodded, gesturing for her to come in. "Of course. What's up?" Carla closed the door behind her and sat down across from him. "I wanted to talk about the outreach program," she began. "I know it's still early, but I think we need to push harder. We've made some progress, but there's still a lot of distrust out there, especially in certain neighborhoods. People aren't going to believe we've changed until they see it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, nodding thoughtfully. I agree. We've made a good start, but we need to go deeper. This isn't just about holding meetings and giving speeches. It's about showing up consistently and proving that we're here to protect and serve, not just from behind a badge, but from the community itself. Carla raised an eyebrow. You think we should do more? Community-based initiatives? More outreach? Marcus smiled, a spark of excitement in his eyes. Exactly. We need to get out there. We need to work with community leaders, organize neighborhood events, and show them that we're committed to being partners in making their neighborhood safer, not just the enforcers of the law. Carla nodded, a smile starting to form on her face. I like that, but we're going to need everyone on board for this to work. Marcus's expression became serious. I know. That's why it's so important that we lead by example. The officers who are on board already, they're the ones who can help us bring the others around. We need to create a culture where working with the community is seen as part of our duty, not something extra. Carla sat in silence for a moment, then spoke up. I've noticed a few officers starting to come around. They're starting to see what we're trying to do, but there are still a few who are resistant. Marcus nodded. We can't force anyone to change, but we can keep showing them what it looks like when we lead with integrity. We'll get there. Slowly, but we'll get there. Carla stood up, walking toward the door. Well, I'll get started on planning the next event. We'll need some help organizing it, but I think it's time we take this to the next level. Marcus stood as well, walking over to the window and looking out at the city below. Let's make it happen, Carla. The community needs to see we're serious about this. And we need to show the officers that this is the future of law enforcement. As Carla left, Marcus stood there for a moment, staring out at the skyline. The city was beautiful, but it was also broken. There was so much work to be done. But for the first time, he truly believed that they were moving in the right direction. Change wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was happening. And Marcus was ready to lead the way. The first community event was a success, but Marcus knew it was only the beginning. The turnout had been good, better than he expected, and there was a real sense of connection between the officers and the community members. The officers who had once resisted the changes now found themselves engaged, participating in conversations, helping set up, and even sharing their own experiences. But Marcus knew that it was still fragile. One event wasn't enough to undo years of mistrust. One event wouldn't heal the deep wounds that had been caused by years of corruption and miscommunication. Still, he couldn't ignore the small victories. It was a sign that the department was starting to shift, slowly but surely. It was a sign that they were headed in the right direction. As the days went by, more events were scheduled, and with each one, the officers grew more confident. They weren't just showing up to check a box anymore. They were showing up because they believed in what they were doing. The shift was happening, but it was delicate. The real test came one evening when Marcus found himself sitting in a community meeting at a local church. The room was filled with residents from one of the most underserved neighborhoods in the city. There was a palpable tension in the air. These people had been burned by the system for years, and now they were being asked to trust it again. Marcus stood at the front of the room, looking out at the faces of people who had every right to be skeptical. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the distrust, the wariness. But he wasn't here to make excuses. He was here to make things right. I know that trust isn't something you give away easily, Marcus said, his voice firm but understanding. And I know that I can't change what has happened in the past. But what we can do, is work to make things better moving forward. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. I'm not here to promise that everything will be perfect. I'm not here to promise that things will change overnight. But I am here to promise that we will listen, that we will act with integrity, and that we will work alongside you, not against you. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, but there was something else there too. Hope. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. A woman in the back of the room stood up, her expression guarded. How do we know you're different? She asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Marcus took a deep breath. Because I'm not here alone, he said. I'm here with my team, and we're all committed to the same goal, to serve you, to protect you, and to build a community where we all work together. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Marcus wasn't sure what would happen next. But then, slowly, the woman nodded. It wasn't an agreement, not yet, but it was a start. The conversation continued, and by the end of the meeting, Marcus could sense the change in the air. It wasn't huge, but it was real. The walls between the community and the department were slowly starting to come down, brick by brick. Marcus left the meeting that night feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like the city was ready to trust again. As he walked through the parking lot, Carla caught up with him. "That went well," she said. "They're starting to listen." Marcus nodded, his eyes focused ahead. "It's just the beginning," he said. "But we're on the right path. We just have to keep showing up, keep doing the work. One step at a time."